Okay, we've got more 7.2 here. Here's a question: y over 4x take away x plus 8 over 6x. And when you look at this, just like the previous ones, you've got to determine, okay, what's my lowest common denominator? And when you talk about denominators like these, 4x, notice what's different about this compared to the examples we've already done. The other examples had denominators that had multiple terms, meaning pieces that were added or subtracted. So we had to be very careful about, what we called factors, and if things were added or subtracted, you had to treat it like it was one factor, unless you could break it down by the rules. There's nothing added or subtracted here, though. It's just 4x. So the basic factors actually are 2 times 2 times x. You've got three factors that you could break down from this one here. 6x, 2 times 3 times x. Those are the basic factors for that denominator. So you're going to want to think about the types of factors. At most, I've got two 2's contained here. Basic factors in terms of 3's. This has got 1, 3. This has got none. And then at most they have each an x. So at most there's 1x in any of these denominators. So when we go to the tutor mode, when they talk about, what's the lowest common denominator, they'll ask us first. We could say there's two 2's, a 3, and an x. 2 times 2 times 3 is 12, and x is represented at most once. So 12x should work as a lowest common denominator. Now what we're going to do is think about how each fraction will change as the result of becoming 12x on the bottom. So I can actually create the fraction, and then down below, just to kind of show my point, I know that based on what I chose, that both these denominators will become 12x. Now what kind of change is going to happen for that to happen with the first fraction? Well, 4x, in order to become 12x, was multiplied by 3. So I got to multiply the top by 3. So it's the same idea we've always been doing, but maybe it looks a little different based on how the denominators look here. So multiply the top and the bottom by 3, becomes 3y over 12x. With the second fraction, I had to multiply the top and the bottom by 2. Or I had to multiply the bottom by 2 to become 12x. So I multiply the top by 2. So on top there, I'm going to have 2x plus 16. Okay, because if you multiply x plus 8 by 2, you're going to get that when you distribute. Okay, and they say combine the numerators. Remember again, this was a subtraction, so at the point that you start combining things on the top, you got to remember to distribute that negative in. So I end up with 3y minus 2x minus 16. Okay, notice I can't combine any of those terms together. So those are the numerators, simplified as far as we can go. I certainly can't factor that, like pull anything out that's common, anything like that. So I'll say 3y minus 2x minus 16 over the common denominator of 12x. And we're done. Okay, another example. Now here's a weird little example. I was hoping we'd see one of these in this sequence. You've got 3 minus x, and you've got x minus 3 for the denominators. So when something looks like, when you have a binomial that looks like another binomial, but the only difference is that things are flipped so that the minus is attached to the other term, what you can basically do is imagine pulling out a negative 1 as a common factor, in a sense, from the one that's kind of reversed, and you're going to end up with negative 1 times the other guy. Okay, so let's see how they kind of talk about it in the tutor mode. But the way I think of it is that if you pull out, if you flip this around and called it negative x plus 3, that would remind you that there's a negative out front that you can pull out. That means you'd have negative 1 times parentheses x minus 3. So the lowest common denominator, I think what they'll let us type is, see if we can do it here. They might not let me type it in the way I'm describing, although this should certainly work. You probably don't want the parentheses. Yeah, okay. So what we'll do is basically, I think we can just say x minus 3 is the lowest common denominator, and what we'll do is we'll recognize that a negative 1 can come out of this guy, and we'll deal with that. So in other words, they say write as equivalent fractions. Well, if I were to take the first fraction, factor out a negative 1 from the bottom, I would end up with it on the bottom an x minus 3 instead of a 3 minus x. But what would we do with that negative? Well, if you're multiplying by a negative 1 on the bottom, it's like multiplying by a negative 1 on the top. So this first fraction can become negative 3x over x minus 3 instead. The second fraction is fine the way it is because it's got that common denominator, so no changes need to be made. You got x minus 3 there. Okay, so they like those results, and combine the numerators together. Negative 3x plus 6x gives us 3x. No problem there. And that means our final answer is going to end up being 3x over x take away 3. Okay. See how we're doing for time. I don't have a heck of a lot of time left, but I'm going to kind of talk this one through really quick. Give you one more example. When you look at this, you're trying to come up with, again, common denominator. Tutor mode says what's the lowest common denominator. Think about the fact that x squared plus x minus 42 can factor, and you're actually going to get x minus 6 times x plus 7 out of this guy when you go for the combinations like in section 6.2b and 6.2c. So we're going to have a lowest common denominator of x squared plus x minus 42. Okay. X squared plus x minus 42, common denominator. So what are we going to have? I think I'm going to kind of pause this so I can type it all in, save us some time here. Okay, so the first fraction will stay as it is. The second fraction will become 6x plus 42 over x squared plus x minus 42, because you look and say, alright, in order to get that common denominator, what did I do to this guy on the bottom? I need to multiply by x plus 7, the other factor that this has. But if I multiply the top by x plus 7, I distribute the 6 in, I'm going to get 6x plus 42. Okay, so those are our two fractions. And they say combine the tops together. Well, if I do that, I'm going to end up with 10x plus 45. That's looking good. And then finally, write this as 10x plus 45 over x squared plus x. I'm going to type in the plus sign here. Plus x minus 42. Okay. Well, this gives you some good examples to check out, and let me know if you have any questions on this section.